The Galactic Council chamber was alive with noise as representatives from different planets gathered for an important meeting. The room was large and circular, with high ceilings that made even the quietest whisper echo. Delegates sat in their assigned seats dressed in colorful robes and shiny uniforms. Some leaned close to each other, speaking in hushed tones, while others tapped impatiently on their tablets or adjusted their communication devices. Everyone seemed to be waiting for something unusual to happen. Today's session was unlike any other. A request had come from two of the most dangerous planets in the galaxy, worlds known as Deathworlds. These planets were infamous for their harsh environments, filled with deadly creatures and constant threats. Few people dared to visit them, and even fewer returned to tell the tale. Yet now representatives from these worlds had asked to speak at the council. No one knew what they wanted, but rumors had been spreading like wildfire. The doors at the far end of the chamber slid open with a soft hiss, and all conversation stopped. Every head turned to see who was entering. Two figures stepped inside, their presence immediately commanding attention. The first was a tall man with broad shoulders and a face lined with scars. His name was Daniel Stone, and his rough appearance suggested he had seen more battles than most soldiers could imagine. Beside him stood a woman named Emily Blake. She was shorter than Daniel, but her sharp eyes scanned the room with an intensity that made some delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. Both wore simple clothing, dark pants and sturdy boots, with jackets that looked practical rather than stylish. Their outfits were plain compared to the elaborate garments of the council members, yet they carried themselves with confidence. It was clear they didn't care about impressing anyone. They walked side by side toward the center of the room, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed them. Counselor Marcus Hale, the leader of the assembly, cleared his throat and stood up. He was a middle-aged man with neatly combed hair and a suit that gleamed under the lights. "Welcome," he said, though his voice betrayed a hint of nervousness. "Representatives of your worlds, we are honored by your presence. What brings you before us today?" Daniel stopped a few feet away from the podium and crossed his arms over his chest. His expression was unreadable, but there was a weight to his silence that made the entire room feel tense. Finally, he spoke. "We're here to deliver a message," he said in a deep, steady voice. "One that concerns not just our planets, but every world in this galaxy." A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. Some delegates exchanged worried glances, while others leaned forward in their seats, eager to hear more. Emily stepped forward, her movements smooth and deliberate. She fixed her gaze on the counselors, her tone calm but firm. "Our worlds are not like yours," she began. "We live in places where danger is constant. Predators hunt us, storms rage without warning, and survival is never guaranteed. We've learned to adapt, to fight, to endure, no matter the cost." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one spoke. Then she continued, her voice growing colder. "But now, something new has emerged. Something worse than anything we've ever faced. It threatens not only our planets but yours as well." The room erupted into murmurs. Some delegates demanded clarification, while others expressed skepticism. One man stood up, his face red with anger. "This sounds like nonsense," he shouted. "Why should we believe you? Your worlds are known for chaos and violence. How do we know this isn't some trick?" Emily's lips twitched slightly, but her expression remained serious. "You don't have to believe us," she replied. "But when the time comes, and it will, you'll regret dismissing us." Counselor Rachel Meyer, a stern woman with sharp features and a reputation for being skeptical, raised her hand to quiet the room. Once silence fell, she addressed the pair. "If what you say is true, then prove it. Give us evidence. Otherwise, this is nothing more than a baseless claim." Daniel's jaw tightened, and for a moment it looked like he might argue, but Emily placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. Instead of responding immediately, she reached into a small bag slung across her shoulder and pulled out a device. It was a metal box, no larger than a shoebox, with blinking lights and a transparent window on top. She set it carefully on the table in front of the council. "This is a fragment of the threat we're talking about," she explained. "It's contained, for now, but I suggest you pay close attention." The room grew quieter as everyone focused on the box. Inside, a dark mass writhed and twisted, pulsating faintly with an unnatural glow. The sight sent a shiver down many spines. Even the bravest among the counselors couldn't help but lean back in their chairs, instinctively trying to put distance between themselves and the mysterious object. What is that?" stammered Counselor Hale, his usual composure slipping. "That," Daniel said, his voice low and grave, "is what we call the swarm. It's intelligent, relentless, and it doesn't stop until everything in its path is destroyed." The murmurs returned, louder this time. Some delegates called for the meeting to be adjourned, while others demanded further explanation. The tension in the room was palpable, a mix of fear and disbelief swirling together. Daniel and Emily stood calmly amidst the chaos, their expressions unchanged. They had delivered their warning, and now it was up to the council to decide what to do next. As the debate raged on around them, Daniel glanced at Emily. She gave him a slight nod, her eyes reflecting both determination and resignation. Whatever happened next, they had done their part. Whether the galaxy chose to listen was out of their hands. The room was alive with tension as the council members tried to process what they had just heard. The box containing the writhing mass sat on the table, its faint glow casting eerie shadows on the faces of those nearby. Some delegates couldn't bring themselves to look at it, while others stared intently, their expressions a mix of fascination and dread. Counselor Marcus Hale adjusted his tie for the third time in as many minutes, his hands trembling slightly. He glanced at the Deathworlders standing near the podium, their calm demeanor only making the situation feel more unsettling. Emily Blake took a step forward, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "Let me make one thing clear," she said, her tone firm but measured. "We didn't come here to scare you. We came to warn you. The swarm isn't something you can ignore or dismiss. It doesn't care about your politics, your borders, or your laws. All it does is consume." Counselor Rachel Meyer leaned forward in her seat, her sharp eyes narrowing. "You expect us to take this seriously based on what? A box with some strange substance inside? This could be anything, a trick, a hoax, or even a weapon you're trying to smuggle into our territory." Daniel Stone crossed his arms over his chest, his scars catching the light as he shifted his weight. "If we wanted to harm you, we wouldn't need tricks," he replied, his voice low and steady. "We've fought things worse than you can imagine. If we wanted your worlds destroyed, we'd let the swarm do the work for us." The room fell silent at his words. Some delegates exchanged uneasy glances, while others scribbled notes furiously, trying to make sense of the situation. Emily continued, her gaze sweeping across the room. "The swarm isn't just another predator. It's intelligent. It learns. It adapts. And it spreads faster than anything we've ever seen. When it reaches a planet, it doesn't leave until there's nothing left. No life, no resources, no hope." A younger delegate, a man named Victor Lane, stood up abruptly. His face was pale, but his voice carried determination. "Even if we believe you, and that's a big if, what exactly do you want from us? Resources, military support, what?" Emily shook her head. "We don't want anything from you. Not directly anyway. What we want is for you to prepare, fortify your defenses, evacuate vulnerable colonies, share information with other systems so they know what's coming. If you act now, you might stand a chance." Victor frowned, clearly unsatisfied with her answer. "And if we don't? What then?" Daniel's expression darkened. "Then you'll die, just like everyone else who thought they were safe." The room erupted into chaos. Some delegates shouted questions while others argued among themselves. One woman, a representative from a wealthy trade planet, slammed her fist on the table. "This is outrageous. You waltz in here with your horror stories and expect us to drop everything and listen? Do you have any idea how much it would cost to fortify entire planets? To evacuate billions of people?" Emily didn't flinch. "Do you have any idea how much it costs to lose an entire civilization?" She shot back. Her voice was calm, but There was an edge to it that silenced the woman mid-sentence. "We're not asking you to trust us blindly. We're telling you what's coming. Whether you choose to act is up to you." Counselor Marcus Hale raised both hands in an attempt to restore order. "Enough," he barked, his voice echoing through the chamber. The noise gradually subsided, though the tension remained thick. He turned to Daniel and Emily, his brow furrowed. "Let's say, for argument's sake, that we believe you. How do we even begin to fight something like this? What do we do?" Emily gestured toward the box on the table. "Start by studying it. Learn its weaknesses. Develop weapons that can stop it. Work together instead of wasting time arguing over who should take responsibility." She paused, letting her words sink in before adding, "But don't wait too long. The swarm isn't going to give you time to debate." Daniel stepped closer to the table, his boots clicking softly against the polished floor. "We captured this fragment at great cost," he said, pointing to the writhing mass inside the box. "It's dangerous, yes, but it's also your best chance to understand what you're dealing with. Use it wisely." Rachel Meyer stood up, her lips pressed into a thin line. "And what happens if we refuse? Will you go running back to your death worlds and leave the rest of us to fend for ourselves?" Daniel met her gaze without blinking. "We warned you. That's all we can do. Our worlds are already preparing. We'll focus on protecting our own people. As for the rest of you," he shrugged, his tone indifferent, "that's your choice." The room fell silent again, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. Some delegates looked thoughtful, while others appeared defiant. A few whispered urgently to their aides, likely drafting messages to send back to their home planets. Counselor Hale rubbed his temples, clearly overwhelmed by the enormity of the situation. Finally, Rachel broke the silence. "This council operates on evidence and reason, not fear-mongering. Until we have concrete proof of this supposed threat, I move that we adjourn this meeting and reconvene once further analysis has been conducted." Several delegates nodded in agreement, though others looked hesitant. Emily sighed softly, exchanging a glance with Daniel. They had expected resistance, but that didn't make it any less frustrating. Still, they knew better than to push too hard. Forcing the council to act would only breed resentment, and they didn't have the luxury of time to waste on arguments. "Very well," Emily said, her voice cool and composed. "We'll leave you to your debates. But remember this. When the swarm arrives, and it will, you won't have the luxury of second-guessing yourselves." With that, she picked up the containment box and tucked it securely under her arm. Daniel gave the council one last long look before turning to follow her. Together they walked out of the chamber, leaving behind a room full of uneasy whispers and unanswered questions. As the doors slid shut behind them, the tension in the council chamber began to shift. Some delegates immediately launched into heated discussions while others sat quietly, deep in thought. Outside, Daniel and Emily moved quickly down the corridor, their footsteps echoing off the walls. Neither spoke until they reached the exit, where a sleek shuttle awaited them. "Well, that went about as well as expected," Daniel muttered, climbing into the vehicle. Emily nodded, her expression unreadable. "They'll argue for days, maybe weeks. By the time they decide to act, it might already be too late." Daniel smirked grimly. "Then they'll get what's coming to them." Emily didn't respond. Instead, she stared out the window as the shuttle lifted off, her mind racing, with thoughts of what lay ahead. The galaxy had been warned. Now it was up to them to decide whether to listen or suffer the consequences. The shuttle carrying Daniel Stone and Emily Blake soared through the atmosphere, leaving the gleaming towers of the Galactic Council headquarters far behind. Inside, the air was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Neither of them spoke as the vehicle hummed along its programmed route, the only sound coming from the faint whir of the engines. The box containing the fragment of the swarm sat securely on the seat between them, its eerie glow casting shadows that danced across the walls. Emily stared out the window, her sharp eyes reflecting the endless expanse of stars. She knew the council's reaction had been predictable: hesitation, skepticism, and ultimately, inaction. It wasn't their fault, not entirely. They were politicians, bureaucrats who thrived on procedure and evidence. But the swarm didn't care about procedures or evidence. It would come anyway, relentless and unstoppable, and by then it would be too late. Daniel broke the silence first. "Do you think they'll actually do anything?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. He leaned back in his seat, one hand resting on his knee while the other drummed a slow rhythm against the armrest. Emily didn't turn to look at him. "Some of them might," she said after a moment, "but most won't. Not until they see it for themselves. And by then—" She let the sentence trail off, the implication clear. Daniel nodded grimly. "Then we focus on what we can control. Our worlds, our people." Emily finally turned her head, meeting his gaze. There was a flicker of determination in her eyes, though it was tempered by the weight of what lay ahead. "We warned them," she said firmly. "That's all we could do. If they choose to ignore us, that's on them." The shuttle descended toward a docking station orbiting a nearby moon. It was a small utilitarian structure, designed for function rather than aesthetics. As they disembarked, a team of technicians wearing gray uniforms approached them. Their faces were tense but professional, and they wasted no time escorting Daniel and Emily to a secure lab. Inside, the room was filled with humming equipment and glowing monitors. The walls were lined with shelves, stacked high with tools and supplies, everything meticulously organized. A scientist named Clara, a wiry woman with short hair and glasses perched on her nose, greeted them at the entrance. Her expression was serious, almost grim. "This way," she said, gesturing for them to follow. "We've prepared everything for analysis." They moved to a reinforced containment chamber at the center of the lab. The walls were made of thick, transparent material, designed to withstand immense pressure and prevent any breach. Clara motioned for Emily to place the box inside. With careful precision, Emily set it down and stepped back, allowing the technicians to activate the transfer sequence. The writhing mass inside the box was lifted into the chamber by mechanical arms, suspended in midair as sensors scanned it from every angle. The swarm fragment pulsed faintly, its movements erratic but deliberate. On the monitors surrounding the chamber, streams of data began to appear, scrolling faster than anyone could read. Clara studied the readings closely, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It's unlike anything we've seen before," she murmured. "It's alive, but not in the way we understand life. Its structure is constantly shifting, adapting." "That's the swarm," Daniel said, his tone flat. "It doesn't stay still, it evolves. That's how it survives." Clara glanced at him, her lips pressed into a thin line. "If this is just a fragment, I don't want to know what the full thing looks like." "You don't," Emily replied. Simply, she crossed her arms over her chest, her eyes fixed on the writhing mass. "What we need to know is how to stop it. Can you find a weakness, something we can use against it?" Clara hesitated, glancing at the monitors again. "It's too early to say. This kind of analysis takes time. Days, maybe weeks. But even then, there's no guarantee we'll find anything useful." Daniel frowned, his jaw tightening. "We don't have weeks. Every second we waste gives it more time to spread." "I know," Clara said, her voice tinged with frustration. "But science doesn't work on deadlines. We'll do our best, but you need to prepare for the possibility that we might not find a solution in time." Emily nodded slowly. She had expected as much. Science was important, but survival often came down to brute force and sheer willpower. "Keep working," she said. "Let us know if you find anything. In the meantime, we'll handle the rest." With that, she turned and walked out of the lab, Daniel following close behind. Once they were back in the corridor, Emily stopped and leaned against the wall, closing her eyes for a brief moment. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. They had done everything they could to warn the galaxy, but now it was up to each world to decide its own fate. Daniel noticed her pause and stopped beside her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Emily opened her eyes and straightened, forcing herself to focus. "I'm fine," she said. "Just thinking about what comes next." "What comes next is what always comes next. Daniel." replied. We fight. We survive. We protect our own. Emily managed a faint smile. Simple as that, huh? Simple as that, Daniel echoed, though there was no humor in his tone. He glanced down the corridor where the hum of activity continued unabated. We should get moving. There's still a lot to do. They made their way to a communications hub located deeper within the station. Here, rows of operators worked, tirelessly, sending and receiving messages from across the galaxy. The screens above their heads displayed maps and updates, tracking the movements of ships and colonies. It was a chaotic scene, but one that reflected the urgency of the moment. Emily approached the lead operator, a man named Greg who was typing furiously on a console. Status report, she said without preamble. Greg looked up, his face pale and drawn. Not good, he admitted. We've received reports of unusual activity near the outer colonies. Entire settlements have gone dark. No distress signals. No survivors, just silence. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. The swarm? It matches the pattern, Greg confirmed. Fast, silent, and devastating. Some of the survivors who managed to escape mentioned seeing things. Shadows moving in the darkness, consuming everything in their path. Daniel clenched his fists, his knuckles white. How many planets are affected? At least 3. So far, Greg replied. But it's spreading. Fast. Emily exchanged a glance with Daniel. The situation was worse than they had feared. The swarm wasn't waiting for the galaxy to act. It was already on the move. Send out a priority alert to all allied systems, she instructed. Tell them to fortify their defenses and evacuate vulnerable areas. Emphasize the importance of speed. Time is critical. Greg nodded and relayed the order to his team. Within moments, the communications hub buzzed with renewed energy as operators scrambled to execute the directive. Emily watched them work for a moment before turning to Daniel. We need to get back to our worlds, she said. They're counting on us. Daniel nodded in agreement. Let's go. As they made their way back to the shuttle bay, Emily's mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. The Council's inaction had sealed the fate of countless lives, but she refused to let despair take hold. There was still hope, however slim. Hope that science would uncover a weakness. Hope that enough planets would heed the warning in time. And hope that, even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity and whatever allies remained would rise to meet the challenge. When they reached the shuttle, Emily paused for a moment, looking out at the vastness of space. The stars twinkled innocently, unaware of the storm brewing within their midst. Somewhere out there the swarm was spreading, devouring everything in its path. But here, aboard this small vessel, 2 Deathworlders stood ready to fight. Will, stop it, Emily said quietly, more to herself than to Daniel. One way or another. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch firm and reassuring. We will, he said. Together. And with that, they boarded the shuttle, setting a course for home. The shuttle carrying Daniel Stone and Emily Blake descended through the thick, turbulent atmosphere of their home planet. The world below was a harsh and unforgiving place, its surface scarred by jagged mountains, endless deserts, and dense jungles, teeming with predators. For most people, it would have been a nightmare. But for Daniel and Emily, it was home, a place where survival was earned through blood, sweat, and sheer determination. As the shuttle touched down on a landing pad carved into the side of a cliff, a team of soldiers was already waiting. They wore rugged armor and carried weapons that looked more like tools than firearms, designed to withstand the brutal conditions of their environment. Their leader, a grizzled man named Carter, stepped forward as the hatch opened. Welcome, back, he said, his voice rough but respectful. We've been expecting you. Emily nodded, her expression unreadable. What's the situation? Carter gestured for them to follow him as they made their way toward a nearby command center. It's bad, he admitted. Refugees have started arriving from the outer colonies. They're bringing stories about entire settlements. Disappearing overnight, survivors describe Something moving in the darkness, fast, silent, and deadly. Daniel clenched his jaw, his hands tightening into fists. The swarm. Carter nodded grimly. That's what they're calling it. It's spreading faster than anyone anticipated. Some of our scouts reported unusual activity near the southern border. We think it might be heading this way. Emily exchanged a glance with Daniel. They had feared this moment would come sooner rather than later. Their world was dangerous enough without adding an alien threat to the mix. Still, they couldn't afford to panic. Panic led to mistakes, and mistakes led to death. We need to prepare, Emily said firmly. Fortify the settlements, evacuate anyone living in vulnerable areas, and make sure every soldier knows what we're dealing with. Carter nodded. Already underway. But it's not going to be easy. This planet isn't exactly built for mass evacuations. No, Emily agreed. But we don't have a choice. They reached the command center, a bunker-like structure buried deep within. The rock. Inside, the air was cool and stale, filled with the hum of computers and the murmur of voices. Maps covered the walls, marked with red zones indicating areas of concern. A group of officers stood around a large table, discussing strategies and logistics. Emily stepped up to the table, her presence immediately commanding attention. Listen up, she said, her voice cutting through the chatter. The swarm is real, it's here, and it's coming for us. We warned the galaxy, but they chose to ignore us. Now it's up to us to protect ourselves and anyone else who makes it to our shores. One of the officers, a young woman named Riley, raised her hand hesitantly. How do we fight something like that? We don't even know what it is. We fight it the way we fight everything else, Daniel replied, his tone hard and unyielding. With strength, intelligence, and determination. We adapt. We survive. Riley nodded, though her expression remained uncertain. Emily understood. Her fear. The unknown was always terrifying, especially when it came wrapped in shadows and death. But fear wouldn't save them. Action would. We'll use what we know, Emily continued. The swarm consumes everything in its path, but it moves in patterns. Patterns we can track. Patterns we can exploit. Set up observation posts along the borders. Use drones to monitor the terrain. And if you see anything unusual, report it immediately. The officers nodded, jotting down notes as Emily spoke. She turned to Carter. What about the refugees? They're being housed in temporary shelters, Carter explained. But resources are tight. Food, water, medicine. We're already stretched thin. Emily sighed, rubbing her temples. They had known this would happen, but knowing didn't make it easier. Divert whatever you can spare. If necessary, start rationing supplies. And make sure the newcomers are integrated into the defense plans. Every pair of hands counts. Carter nodded, though his expression suggested he wasn't optimistic about their chances. Understood. As the meeting broke up, Daniel pulled Emily aside. You think we can hold them off? He asked quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Emily hesitated, glancing at the maps on the wall. I don't know, she admitted. But we have to try. If we fall, there's no telling how far the swarm will spread. Daniel nodded, his expression grim. Then we fight. Over the next few days, the planet transformed into a fortress. Barriers were erected around settlements, reinforced with whatever materials could be scavenged. Soldiers patrolled day and night, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. Refugees poured in from neighboring systems, their faces hollow with exhaustion and fear. Many bore injuries or scars, reminders of the horrors they had escaped. Others carried nothing but the clothes on their backs, their homes reduced to ash. Among the newcomers was a man named Lucas, a farmer from one of the outer colonies. He had arrived with his wife and 2 children, their faces pale and drawn. When Emily approached them, Lucas looked up, his eyes filled with desperation. You warned us, he said, his voice trembling. Back at the council meeting. You tried to tell us, but no one listened. I'm sorry, we should have believed you. Emily placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch firm but gentle. It's not your fault, she said. The council made their choice. What matters now is that you're here, safe for now. Lucas nodded, though tears welled up in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. Emily watched as he and his family were led away to one of the shelters. Her heart ached for them, for all of them. These were people who had lost everything, yet they still clung to hope. Hope that they would survive. Hope that someone would stop the swarm before it consumed them all. As night fell, Emily climbed to the top of the cliffs overlooking the settlement. The wind whipped at her hair, carrying with it the scent of dust and smoke. Below, the lights of the encampment flickered like fireflies, a fragile beacon in the darkness. Somewhere out there beyond the horizon, the swarm lurked, waiting. Daniel joined her after a while, his silhouette outlined against the starry sky. "Thinking about the council?" he asked. Emily shook her head. "No. Thinking about what happens next." Daniel was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "We'll hold them off," he said finally. "For as long as we can." "And then?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then we keep fighting," Daniel replied, "until there's nothing left to fight for." Emily nodded, though she didn't respond. She knew he was right. Survival wasn't just about winning, it was about enduring, about holding on no matter how bleak things seemed. And if the swarm wanted a fight, they would give it one. The two Deathworlders stood together side by side, watching the stars twinkle above them. Behind them, the settlement buzzed with activity, a testament to the resilience of those who refused to give up. Ahead of them lay uncertainty, danger, and death. But for now, they stood ready, prepared to face whatever came next. Weeks turned into months, and the swarm continued its relentless advance. News from the outer colonies grew darker with each passing day. Entire planets had fallen silent, their populations wiped out in a matter of hours. Survivors spoke of shadowy creatures that moved like liquid darkness, consuming everything in their path. The descriptions were fragmented, chaotic, but one thing was clear: the swarm was unstoppable. Back at the Galactic Council headquarters, panic had replaced skepticism. Counselor Marcus Hale paced the length of the chamber, his face pale and drawn. The once bustling room now felt eerily empty, many delegates having fled to their homeworlds in a desperate attempt to prepare for the inevitable. Those who remained sat hunched over their tablets, reviewing reports of devastation with growing dread. Rachel Meyer, usually so composed and critical, looked visibly shaken as she stared at the holographic map floating above the center table. Red markers covered large swaths of the galaxy, each one representing a planet lost to the swarm. "This can't be happening," she muttered under her breath, though her voice carried in the quiet room. Counselor Victor Lane slammed his fist on the table, his frustration boiling over. "We should have listened to them," he shouted, pointing an accusing finger at no one in particular. "The Deathworlders warned us. They told us exactly what would happen if we didn't act." Marcus stopped pacing and turned to face the group. "Blaming ourselves won't help us now," he said, his tone heavy with resignation. "What matters is what we do next." "But what can we do?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling. "They said it adapts faster than we can understand. How do you fight something like that?" Victor shook his head, his anger giving way to despair. "Maybe we can't. Maybe this is the end." Before anyone could respond, an alarm blared through the chamber, startling everyone. A technician rushed, in her face pale. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission," she said, addressing Marcus. From the Deathworlders." Marcus frowned, puzzled. "Patch it through." The holographic map dissolved, replaced by the image of Emily Blake. Her expression was calm but serious, her sharp eyes scanning the council members. Behind her, Daniel Stone stood silently, his arms crossed over his chest. Neither of them looked surprised to see the state of the council. "You ignored our warning," Emily began, her voice steady and cold. "Now, the swarm is here. It's spreading faster than even we anticipated. You have two choices: stand your ground and fight, or run and hope you survive long enough to find shelter." Rachel leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of the table. You said your worlds are preparing. What are you doing? How are you fighting it? Emily hesitated, glancing briefly at Daniel before continuing. We're holding it off, for now. But it's not easy. The swarm doesn't stop. It learns. Every tactic we use, it counters. Every weapon we deploy, it adapts to. We're buying time, nothing more. Time for what? Marcus asked, his voice strained. For science, Daniel interjected, speaking for the first time. Your researchers need to keep studying the fragment we gave you. If there's any chance of finding a weakness, it's there. We've fortified our settlements, Emily added, evacuated vulnerable areas. Every person capable of holding a weapon is fighting, but even that might not be enough. If you want to survive, you'll need to do the same. Victor stood up, his face pale but determined. Tell us what to do, please. Emily nodded, her tone softening slightly. Start with the basics. Fortify your cities. Build walls, set traps, use whatever weapons you have. Learn the patterns of the swarm. It moves in waves, leaving destruction behind. Hit it hard when it's concentrated. Retreat when it spreads. And most importantly, don't waste time arguing. Work together. Rachel swallowed hard, her earlier skepticism replaced by fear. And if that doesn't work? Emily's gaze hardened. Then you die, just like everyone else who thought they were safe. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, Marcus straightened his posture and took a deep breath. She's right, he said, his voice firm despite the tremor beneath it. We've wasted enough time. It's time to act. Meanwhile, on their home planet, Daniel and Emily stood atop a ridge overlooking the southern border. The landscape below was dotted with makeshift barricades and armed soldiers, their faces tense but resolute. Refugees continued to pour in, their numbers swelling daily. Food and supplies were running low, but no one complained. Everyone knew the stakes. A scout approached, breathing heavily from the climb. Movement detected, he reported. About 5 kilometers out, looks like shadows. Daniel exchanged a glance with Emily. It's here. Emily nodded, turning to address the soldiers gathered nearby. Listen up, she said, her voice carrying across the ridge. This is it. The swarm is coming. We've trained for this, we've prepared for this, now it's time to fight. The soldiers tightened their grips on their weapons, their expressions grim but determined. They had known this moment would come, and they were ready, or as ready as anyone could be. As night fell, the horizon came alive with movement. Dark shapes writhed and twisted, advancing steadily toward the ridge. The swarm had arrived. Emily raised her hand, signaling for the soldiers to hold their positions. She waited until the mass was close enough to see clearly, close enough to strike. Then with a sharp gesture, she gave the order. The first wave of explosives detonated, sending shockwaves rippling through the swarm. For a brief moment, the shadows faltered, retreating in disarray. But it didn't last. Within seconds, the swarm regrouped, surging forward with renewed ferocity. Fall back, Emily shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. To the second line. The soldiers obeyed, retreating in an organized fashion while laying down covering fire. Battle raged on, a desperate dance of attack and retreat. Each victory was fleeting, each loss devastating. But they held their ground, inch by inch, hour by hour. By dawn, the swarm had been pushed back, for now. The cost had been high. Bodies littered the battlefield, both human and alien. But the settlement still stood, its lights flickering defiantly. In the morning light, Emily stood amidst the wreckage, her armor scorched and her face streaked with dirt and blood. Daniel joined her, his expression unreadable. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. In the distance, the swarm stirred again, its movement sluggish but persistent. It wasn't done. Not yet. Emily turned to the surviving soldiers, her voice weary but unyielding. Rest up, she said. Tend to the wounded. Rebuild the defenses, because tonight, we do it all over again. And as the sun rose over the harsh landscape, the two Deathworlders prepared for another day of survival. The galaxy had ignored their warning, and now it was paying the price. But here, on their unforgiving planet, they would fight, to the last breath, if necessary.